Well, hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today it's another vinyl shootout. This time, Heart's Dreamboat Annie. The 1975 debut by this Canadian group hit us like a rocket with hits called Crazy on You and Magic Man leading the way. This is a very solid debut album, and we have a Mobile Fidelity 2x45 RPM release that we're going to be comparing to some original pressings, one from Canada, one from the United States. The other is going to be a Nautilus half-speed master, and a special version that I have, which is a Nautilus version that is DBX encoded. So we'll see how those fare as we take on another vinyl shootout on this Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. So Dreamboat Annie was Heart's debut album on Mushroom Records, debuting in 1975. Ann and Nancy Wilson, great voices, some great guitar work, some great production work, and one of those albums that you say, a debut album? You gotta be kidding me. But it's true. It was a great one. And all of the records that I have tried on this in terms of going back and forth for this shootout have had very interesting characteristics. But the one common thing I can say is this was a well-recorded album, and it shows up on all of them, in different ways, of course. Now, the original album came out of Canada on Mushroom Records, but it was mastered at Ken Dunn Recorders, and it was done in 1975. And we have, of course, a great process there at Ken Dunn. Many great recordings have come out of that mastering process by Patrick Collins. So it's no surprise whatsoever that this one sounded great. As a matter of fact, the Canadian and US originals are so close, playing them side by side. It's really indistinguishable between the two, except for, of course, the fact that one has a different noise level than the others in terms of the vinyl, but they're both not bad at all in that category. It's just that when it comes down to it, the sonics are really the same. Now, Nautilus also came out with a half-speed master, which I have, and they had this one, which is a Nautilus DBX. Now, although it says up here half-speed mastered, because that's what all of Nautilus's records always said, on the back of the DBX one it says, this DBX encoded Nautilus Super Disc was real-time mastered at IAM Studios in Irvine, California. So this one on the DBX is not in fact a half-speed master. But it was encoded with the DBX process and the compression algorithm so that when it was cut, it was a very compressed cut, so the cutter didn't have to do a lot of work. And the expansion for that comes back out when you use a DBX decoder, which I have up in this rack, the NX40 DBX decoder. And it then brings that full dynamic range out of that compressed sound coming out of that groove and brings it home. So we'll see how that does in comparison to the half-speed Nautilus and the OGs. The queen at the ball is the MoFi, the recently released 2x45 RPM LP coming from a tape copy going to DSD 256 and then to console to the lathe to be cut. That's the provenance on the MoFi. Now, as you might recall, when I went to AXPONA in Chicago about 2 months ago, I was given a preview of this record along with some other folks in a hotel room on a test pressing of this. And in listening to it, I thought, well, I have impressions, but it's a different system, a different room. I don't know if those are going to be relevant or true when I get home on my system. But to some degree, it was, and it is. And so what can we say in total? We can say for sure the original, whether it's the Canada release or the US release, sound fabulous. And the Nautilus is right there too, although it does have some minor characteristic differences from the originals, but still an enjoyable listen. We'll get into the numbers and talk about that. The MoFi, when it came on the turntable and I turned it to Magic Man as the first track, within 10-15 seconds I could tell something was different. And the something that was different was that the top end was not as sharp as it is on the originals. And in fact, that's the exact impression I got when I heard it in Chicago. It wasn't the issue of the system delivering it differently there, because I heard the same thing here. So in listening to side one, which has Magic Man, and then it has Dreamboat Annie, one of the several Dreamboat Annies. This one's called the Fantasy Child, and then it has Crazy on You. Those are the first three songs and the first very impressionable songs on the record, and it takes up one side on this 45 RPM. You immediately are faced with the fact that the highs are not as crisp, sharp, and delineated as they are on the original or the Nautilus. However, the bass and the mids have more girth. They definitely have more kick drum presence and more depth and breadth in the mids on the MoFi. It's a bit of a mixed bag there, but as I went through the album and played more and more of the record, some of those losses of the high end started to dissipate, especially on the quieter songs, where we have songs like Soul of the Sea, Dreamboat Annie, I'll Be Your Song, How Deep It Goes. Definitely those sounded great, and the high end was definitely not attenuated downward. It was right there pretty much with the original, maybe just a tad less, but not as much less as was glaringly obvious on the tracks on side one, Magic Man and Crazy on You. To the point where I began to wonder, is this a Tango in the Night issue? Is there something wrong in the equalization on this side? I'm not sure. Maybe I can get MoFi to answer that question. But it certainly has that characteristic to me. But if you really like a warm sound and the first songs aren't ones that you need or desire to hear a lot of that high end that those originals have, this MoFi suits the bill. And as a matter of fact, I have to honestly say, on a lot of these other songs beyond side one, all of the songs are an extremely great listen. I mean, they are very well balanced, and I enjoyed the heck out of this record. But that first side and those songs that we're all so familiar with, Crazy on You and Magic Man, just didn't have that upper range presence and punch that you're listening for. The bottom end certainly punched, but the top end was lacking some. It had kind of that pretzel logic kind of feel to it. And so that was a bit surprising, disappointing, but the rest of the album, it seems like, really tamed down on that loss and got things back shifted into place. So it's a bit of a mixed bag on this, which is unfortunate and interesting at the same time. But let's go see how things came, and we'll also look at the numbers showing how we did with this DBX, because it's an interesting one that's very different, which I'll give you some more details on when we go through the numbers. The nature of audio comparisons is that the results presented in this video are fully subjective. They are based on my equipment in my listening room using my hearing capability. Therefore, your results may be different. My effort here is to provide you the relative difference of audio characteristics across various pressings. We have 5 pressings involved in this shootout. The first two are from the original pressings in 1975, one from Canada, one from the United States. Both were mastered by Ken Dunn. The pressing from Canada was from Columbia Don Mills, Ontario, and the U.S. was from Columbia Santa Maria in California. Then we get to two Nautilus pressings. One was a half-speed master that was done by Jack Hunt, and it was pressed at KM, and it was released in 1979. And also in 1979, we have a reissue by Nautilus, but it isn't half speed. It's regular speed, but it is DBX encoded. And then, as I noted, I decode it through a DBX NX40. This one was remastered by Jack Hunt and pressed at KM Records. When we come to the MoFi, it is, of course, a 2025 release. We have, in fact, that pressing being done at Fidelity Records Pressing, which is owned by MoFi. Mastering is by Krieg Wunderlich, and the provenance is 1/4 inch 15 IPS Dolby A analog copy tape to DSD 256 to analog console to lathe. And the prices on these with the OGs are $15 to $20 pretty much. The Nautilus is 55-ish. The DBX version of the Nautilus is around 60 and up. And then, of course, the retail there on the Mobile Fidelity is $60. Now, as it relates to the relative dBs or decibel, we have the first two, the originals, being the baseline, and they were the same. The Nautilus was slightly quieter, 1 dB quieter, as it was on the DBX as well. Now, on a DBX, of course, when you have the box that you can use, there are some adjustments there that can be made in terms of volume to match if you need to, but out of the gate, that was the reading I got. And then on the MoFi, it was in spots 2 dB quieter. Now, there are some areas where it wasn't quite that big a difference. It was 1 to 1.5. But the most I discovered between them was 2 dB. So that's where I put that number. On the quietness of the vinyl, we had a couple of 8s on the originals. We had a couple of 9.5s on the Nautilus. They were pretty quiet. And a 10 for Fidelity. Fidelity pressings, let me tell you, talk about quiet, talk about flat. Wow. They're really being done well at that plant. Kudos to them, and hope they can keep it up because it's quite a great start that they've had. Now, as it relates to the sonics area where we get into the bass and the mid-range and the treble, again, the US and the Canadian originals were very common. We had 9s on the bass. The Nautilus was a little lighter on the bass, a tad, 8.5. And but when you put on the DBX version and put the DBX decoder in there, it really pumped. It really cranked, which is a characteristic you would expect because the track that's laid down into the vinyl is compressed, and then this decoding box is taking care of bringing it to its full dynamic range, which is in fact the intent of the product overall. And when it comes to the bass on the MoFi, we get a 9.5. Very solid, definitely better than the originals in that area, and better than the Nautilus, even better. Because it really just had presence there, and it had presence like the DBX did, although the DBX just seemed more uniform, I would say, with it across the board. The mid-range, we had an 8.5 on the 2 US and the Nautilus half-speed, They were decent, but there were some areas where I thought the fullness wasn't quite there at the mid-range level. The DBX on the mid-range was a 10. I mean, it was very solid, very full, filled in some of those areas where I thought there were gaps on that recording. But the MoFi had a 9.5. It was richer in that area as well compared to the originals and the Nautilus, but not quite as balanced in the blend as the DBX sounded. And finally, the treble, we had 9s on the original. Good, strong treble. I don't want to call it bright. I want to call it accurate, crisp, very present. And the Nautilus brought it up a bit even beyond that to a 9.5. So those were all very solid, with the DBX coming in at a 10 again. This DBX just had the right balance of everything. The top end was sweet, is the best way that I could call it. It just really was well balanced with all of the sonics for that record and brought it out just where you wanted it and precise without going over the top. Unfortunately, on the MoFi, this is where we ran into some trouble. Now, again, trouble with the treble, I guess, when I think about it. And that is that, as I said, the early songs on the record, Crazy on You, Magic Man, really had suppression in that area. If I was to just give a number on those songs, I'd probably give it a 6 or a 7. But things smoothed out when we got past that area and got quite pleasing to where it was up in the, maybe the 9 area for treble. But on average, and again, when the two biggest songs on the record have an issue, that's quite a problem. So I gave it an 8 on balance for the treble. But again, it wasn't consistent, as I've mentioned multiple times. Dynamic range here was actually pretty strong across the board. This thing pumps quite a bit, has a lot of range from the bottom to the top in it. Don't really sense compression efforts anywhere in this product to where they all got a 9, except the DBX got a 10, because, again, that's what it does. We come to soundstage and imaging. The U.S. and Canadian first pressings were a 9. It was well placed in the soundstage. Everything was well where you wanted it and had some openness to it for sure. Whereas the Nautilus, it was a little less, just a touch. I don't know if that was a reasoning for that was the half-speed master process or what might have caused it, but just when you were switching there, you could just see that it lost a little bit of that spacing and giving you something that gave you some dimension to it. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to notice and have a half a point. Unlike the DBX, which really opened things up and really had a really open sound to sides and to back and to fronts, just very immersive, I guess I would say, for lack of a better term. Now, the sound, stage, and imaging on the MoFi were very strong as well, especially on the songs that were more ballad-like, almost holographic kind of sound to them. And so it was very good, but the few things on some rock songs were where it got a little more siloed. It didn't quite have the same openness to it as it did on some of those other tunes. So again, kind of trying to average this number out, but ended up in a 9. And then with voices, we ended up with 9s for the first pressings and the Nautilus. Good, strong voice presentation. DBX, again, it's like the voices were belting out. I gave that a 10. I mean, it was much more pounding in that regard to where it was coming at you a bit. Not aggressive to the point of pain, but just really ever present in the room, and really the vocals stood out a bit more on the DBX. then we get to the MoFi, and it was, again, a mix, but it wasn't, the voices weren't something that you would say, oh, that, they really stood out. There are a lot of places where the enunciations and the voice of Ann Wilson was not as precise, and had some areas where it had a nice upper edge to it, to where you weren't picking that up on the MoFi. And so we gave that an 8.5 there for that. So when we get to the aggregate sonics average, we see that the two from the US and Canada that were the originals came out with an 8.92 for their sonics average. And below that, we have the 8.83, slightly lower for the Nautilus. Partly that soundstage and imaging had an effect there, and then the bass not being quite as strong. But it was solid up there, near the same region, but not quite as good as the originals. We get to the easy math here, and you can see that all 10s across the sonics, and the other three ratings are going to give you a 10 average. This record just had it all. I mean, it really showed, given the other versions, where this really had hit the sweet spot in so many places, and basically fixed or right the wrongs of the others where they were lesser. It brought it to bear, so to speak. And, I just really can't recall a record that really just was so impressionable upon me, especially with this many comparisons. And then the MoFi ended up with an 8.92. Again, that variability is there. You got to keep that in mind. So it ended up with literally the same ranking as the OG, but there are some areas of variance in the MoFi that put a little asterisk on that number for me. Even though it's the same number, there's some consistency there that I think is questionable. And then when we get the vinyl in there, of course, the original is a little noisier, went down to 8.79, whereas the Nautilus was cleaner vinyl, 8.93. The DBX removes some noise, but yet its vinyl was still a 9.5, so that brought it a hair under 10. And then with good strong vinyl on that Fidelity pressing, again, it brought it up over 9 to 9.07. So you can see the propositions here. The originals are a couple of bucks per point, whereas you start getting into $6 range for all of the other three, the two Nautiluses and the MoFi. But I will tell you, unfortunately, with this kind of thing, just about nobody has DBX equipment, so that one's almost an outlier. And it's just to share with you that really was that profound. So now you're really looking at the Nautilus versus the Fidelity pressing. And I'd say if you really want consistency, the Nautilus is going to be more consistent across all the songs. And if you want a little edge taken off the top on those rockier songs on the album, the MoFi is going to do it and give you better bass and quieter vinyl. So it's really a matter of what is really to your taste in terms of how you would pick what to do here, because the one that really won is not really a solution because of it being the DBX. So that's how I heard things on my system with my ears in my listening room. I am going to try to check with MoFi just in case on this one, because to me it's such a substantial and obvious thing, but we'll have to see. The numbers tell you a story that paints a different picture for some people depending on whether or not they like certain types of sound, and that is often the case. So it's important to focus on the details of what is there or not there and what your preferences are in order to determine what you might find to be the most appealing pressing out there. A lot of times it's not a matter of just having a winner, but really having a good fit for you. As always, thanks for watching. If you didn't know, I now have a membership opportunity on the channel. Now, to join, you have to actually go to my channel on a browser through a PC or a browser on your phone, but the option doesn't show up in the app on iPhones or Androids, just a note. But when you get to a browser and get to my channel's homepage, right next to where it shows either the subscribe button or shows that you have subscribed, there's a join button next to it. And for $4.99 a month, you will be treated to additional material, including a daily audio diet, a short video that I put out every day to give you some kind of information on vinyl, on music, on equipment, on artists. It's just a cornucopia of information, and it's every day. Additionally, I'll be putting additional information to my shootouts on here, including this one, where I will have more technical data available beyond what is in this video. I also will have some private Q&As for my members, which will be streaming live during certain times when I notify you. So give it a thought, give it a consideration. I'd love to have you as a member. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so by clicking on the bell below. And a thumbs up or like is always wanted, as are those comments. Tell me what your thoughts are on Dreamboat Annie. What's your history with the record? What do you think is the best pressing that you've ever heard? Again, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time at the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Take care, everybody.